Hello and welcome to GBN Originals. I'm Patrick Christys. The European Union, in its infinite wisdom, has decided to double down on its efforts to control what you can say online. Yes, you heard that right. The bureaucrats in Brussels are expanding their censorship powers, and they're doing it under the guise of protecting your democracy. The EU has this thing called the Digital Services Act, or DSA. Now, they'll tell you it's all about making the internet a safer place, but when you peel back the layers, what you find is a thinly veiled attempt to control the narrative and silence dissenting voices. Let's have a little listen, shall we, to what Henna Virkkunen said.
DSA does not censor content. It creates efficient mechanism for the removal of illegal content defined by other EU or national law, such as illegal hate speech. Because what is illegal offline is also illegal online. We have also seen it in the last month in Romania, where the Constitutional Court annulled presidential elections after declassified documents alleged the existence of coordinated manipulation campaign on TikTok. We opened formal proceedings on that against TikTok.
First off, they're ramping up their hate speech laws. Now, don't get me wrong, actual hate speech is obviously a problem. But the problem is, who gets to define what constitutes hate speech? The EU, apparently. And they're not just talking about removing genuinely harmful content. No, they are predictably casting a much wider net. The European Commission is now mandating that so-called hate speech must be assessed within 24 hours and removed if deemed necessary. 24 hours! It's hardly enough time for a proper investigation, is it? It's a knee-jerk reaction that could lead to the suppression of legitimate speech and debate. The EU is also doubling down on their fact-checking measures. Now, who doesn't want facts, right? But the problem is, these fact-checkers aren't always as impartial as they'd like us to believe. We've seen time and time again how fact-checking can be used to push a particular, usually left-wing, agenda, rather than simply verifying information. The EU is expanding its enforcement team for the DSA. By the end of this year, they'll have 200 staff members working to enforce these new roles. That's 200 people whose job it is to police what you say online. If that doesn't send a chill down your spine, I don't know what will. But why now? Why this sudden push to tighten the screws on online speech? Well, it seems our friends in Brussels are a bit rattled by recent events across the pond. The return of Donald Trump to the White House has them in a tizzy. You see, unlike during his first term, many of the big tech companies are now actually supporting Trump's policies, including his stance against online censorship. And how does the EU react to this? By claiming it's a direct threat to European democracy. They just don't get it, do they? Yes, you heard that right. According to EU Commission Vice President Henna Virkkunen, tech companies supporting free speech is somehow a threat to democracy. Now, I don't know about you, but I always thought free speech was a cornerstone of democracy, not a threat to it. Perhaps in traditional EU fashion, they just don't like free speech when it criticises them. Now, Virkkunen claims the DSA isn't a censorship law, but in the same breath, she outlines how it could be used to censor content. If speech is deemed illegal offline, she says, the DSA now makes it illegal online too. And remember, we're not just talking about EU laws here. This applies to the laws of all 27 member states, many of which have their own restrictive speech laws. So it's ridiculous, isn't it? And I know we were saying before about how, look at how many staff they've got, 200, but 200 staff to monitor hate speech across 27 countries? Not that much, is it? Let's be clear about what is happening here. The EU is essentially trying to maintain its grip on the narrative. They're worried that if people are allowed to speak freely online, they might start questioning the wisdom of their unelected bureaucrats. But this isn't just about the EU, it affects all of us. In our interconnected world, what happens on the internet in one region can have far-reaching consequences. Now, if the EU succeeds in implementing these draconian measures, it could set a dangerous precedent for online censorship worldwide. Now, let's not forget the practical implications. These new rules put an enormous burden on tech companies. They're expected to police content 24/7, make snap judgments on complex issues, and potentially censor content that might be perfectly legal in other parts of the world. It's a recipe for overreach and mistakes. Moreover, this approach completely ignores the nuances of language and context. What might be considered offensive in one culture could be perfectly acceptable in another. By trying to apply a one-size-fits-all approach to online speech, the EU is trampling on cultural differences and individual expression. But then again, that's par for the course for them, isn't it? But perhaps the most concerning aspect of all is the chilling effect it will have just on all of our free speech. When people know they're being watched, when they fear that their words might be flagged or removed, they're less likely to speak up. And we saw an example of that right here in Britain, didn't we? During the summer disorder, where people started getting locked up for saying things online. And all of a sudden, everyone on social media started to get very, very worried about whether or not they were going to get a knock on the door from the police. It wasn't a nice time, but now apparently that's going to spread to an entire continent. They're less likely to challenge the status quo, aren't they? If you think that you might get your door booted in by the plods. And that, my friends, is how you stifle innovation, you stifle creativity, you stifle progress, and you stifle free thinking. Now, I'm not saying the internet should be a free-for-all. Of course, there needs to be some rules. But rules should be clear, narrowly defined, and applied with the utmost care and consideration for free speech, and, crucially, with absolute consistency. And what the EU is proposing is the opposite of that. We need to protect our own right to free speech and stand in solidarity with those whose voices are being silenced. Because make no mistake, if we allow this kind of censorship to take root in one part of the world, won't be long before it spreads to the rest of it, will it? What we're seeing from the EU is nothing short of an assault on freedom of speech. It's a dangerous overreach that threatens the very foundations of our democracy, instead of protecting it like they would have you believe in this Orwellian nightmare they want to create. We must resist it, challenge it, fight for it as well, because if we don't, well, we might wake up one day to find that right has been taken away from us, all in the name of, like I said, protecting democracy. And once you lose those rights, it's very difficult to ever get them back. This is Patrick Christys. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to GB News YouTube channel. And remember, your voice matters. Don't let anyone silence it.
The EU has the most advanced and powerful legal framework for online platforms, balancing freedom and responsibility, the Digital Services Act. The DSA does not censor content. It creates efficient mechanism for the removal of illegal content defined by other EU or national law, such as illegal hate speech. Because what is illegal offline is also illegal online. We have also seen it in the last month in Romania, where the Constitutional Court annulled presidential elections after declassified documents alleged the existence of coordinated manipulation campaign on TikTok. We opened formal proceedings on that against TikTok. Since the entry into application of the DSA, 25 very large platforms and search engines were designated, and no less than 10 proceedings were opened. 1 against X, 3 against TikTok, 1 against AliExpress, 2 each against Meta's Facebook and Instagram, and 1 against Temu. This week, we assessed and confirmed the suitability of the Code of Conduct on illegal hate speech online under the DSA. This will strengthen the response against all illegal online hate speech as defined by different EU and member states' laws, so that hate speech flagged is assessed in 24 hours and removed if necessary.